So good evening, everyone. Once again, session 4. It's our last official session of Money, Wealth, and Jesus. And then we have a bonus session next week for those of you who would still like to learn more about 3-generational approach in investment. Last week, there we go, or the last 2 weeks, we've talked about treasures in heaven, right? And we've used this slide as sort of a guideline or as an imagination of how it could look like when we deposit by giving in obedience, and then we open the windows of heaven by tithing, and we access or we withdraw by faith in the name of Jesus, and then we pour that money or the goods or whatever we're getting, we pour it into a closed circle, which consists of obligations, necessities, and wants. And once that closed circle, which we have obviously defined together out of our relationship with the Lord and agreed with the Lord, and once that closed circle is provided for and there's an overflow, that flows back into the kingdom of God. So that was our model that we were working from. And then we've talked about the closed circle in detail last week on how that is being applied and how that can be very practical. And I think that's where we want to start off today. I'm sure you've been thinking about that again. You've tried to get your heads around it and how would that work in my own finances. It looked very nice on theory, on paper, or on slides. But when it comes to your own finances, all of a sudden it's maybe a little bit more tricky, or it seems more tricky. And so we want to start off with the opportunity for everyone to ask questions, and then we can discuss it before we move on into the next phase of this evening. So yeah, the mic is open. Anyone would like to ask questions or just process a little bit with us what you've been thinking since last week?
I think for us personally, a question arose today. I think Graham had asked about savings, and we were thinking about our children's savings. Like, would that be also in the same category as the pension, in the necessities, or would it come after? Because we think it's important to save for our kids, but we weren't too sure where it would go.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I can't give you a general answer because every family will have a different situation, and we'll discuss that differently with the Lord because you will have different priorities in your life. But I think it will also a little bit depend on what you're saving for. So I would suggest that you're not just saving for kids, but you're saving for kids' education or for kids' startup when they are adults or whatever. Like, you give it a purpose. And so you could have different savings even for the kids with different purposes. But then according to the purpose, there might be a different priority. So some of it might be a need where you say, okay, my kids, they will need to go through school. They will need to go to varsity or to study something or learn something. So that portion of savings for your kids, you would possibly have in your needs or necessities. But then there's maybe other things that like, you want to start saving for a house for your kids or whatever, to give them a kickoff, when they leave your house, or you want to bless them with a car when they turn 18 or whatever it might be. Then that one would maybe be more in the wants. That's not necessarily a necessity unless this is such a high value in your family and all the generations before you have done it, and there will be a huge expectation that you will do it. Then it can also be a need or necessity, but that's something that you will have to basically decide together with God, out of that relationship that we have with him and out of hearing his voice, and then you will define it accordingly. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Anyone else? Was it clear for everyone? Can you confidently say, I can start if I want to? I mean, you don't have to. It's not, I'm not telling you what you have to do, but if you choose to apply this system, can you confidently say, I could do it with my own finances? I have the tools, I know how to do it, and I know where to go and ask questions if I struggle. Clarissa is confident. It's good. Everyone else too?
I can say that personally, your illustration with your jars and the money last week was really helpful because I'm very visual. And I think the tithing every time at first place and then seeing the distribution was something that really opened my eyes, and it was very helpful.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And of course, it's not something you will do for the rest of your life in a physical way, right? With jars or with envelopes, but it can be a start. You know, if you do struggle with what do you call it, Excel sheets or stuff like that, then you might want to start with charts. I told you guys the other day that I had an outreach team. The outreach leaders, they lived it exactly like that. They had about 10 different small jam charts that they took along, and that's how they handled their finances. And each chart had a name on it. And when a team needed to go on outreach, they would take the transport chart and the food chart, and then they would go. And then when they had to buy transport, like the taxi to go to the village, then they would pay out of the transport chart. And when they bought sandwiches, they bought out of their food chart, you know, and so it worked perfectly for them. So it is a good way of doing it in that way to get used to it. But obviously, when you have to handle bigger amounts of money, it can become a bit of a challenge and also safety risk. You know, you would have a big safe where you lock that money in. So it would be easier to have bank accounts and then just split or allocate your money on an Excel sheet or in a proper app that you can get on the market. All right. If there is no other questions.
Sorry.
Yeah, cool. Go for it.
Can you put some suggestions of apps that you think are helpful?
Yeah, I gave you the other day, last week, I gave you one. It's called, I would have to go back. I don't have it in this presentation now, but I can send it to you again. That is a good one. I'm personally using one that is called Money Well, like the well, the fountain, Money Well. And but that one that only works on Mac. So I think around $100 once off, and then you have the app, and then you can run with it. That one I really enjoy. It's providing a lot of options. And it's working with baskets. It even physically has little baskets, and if they're empty, they turn around, so you know there's no money in there. And so it has a bit of a visual with it, and so it's fun to work with it. So Moneywell, if you have a Mac, is great. But then if you work with PC, there's lots of other apps as well that can work. We were actually at one stage developing one, but it never took off really. We never managed to finish it with our developers, because that one would have properly implemented also the tithing and everything, which most apps don't do, unfortunately, because they're not produced by Christians. But the system is the same. It's the envelope system, and you can use it. But I can send you a few hints by email, a few tips. All right. So there were the practical examples: obligations, necessities, wants. You don't seem to have any questions, so we're not going to go into it. I'm really impressed by you guys' ability to just get it so quickly. Maybe even a little bit embarrassed, because I took like 2 years to really fully understand. You guys got it in 2 sessions, so it's amazing. I'm proud of you guys. Why do I believe that jars or envelopes or Excel sheets that are managed like that are so powerful? I think it can save your marriage if you're married. Why? Because you both agree on the priorities together, and then you will not have fights. Like my wife and I, we used to have constant fights about spending money. We did have a budget, but we didn't have a closed circle. So we budgeted some money here and there and so on. But then when she bought clothes, I was so upset. How can you spend so much money on a dress, on shoes, or what? And she bought much more clothes than I bought. But then when I bought electronics, like a new laptop or a new phone, then she got upset. How can I spend so much money on all these devices? And I'm getting upset that she buys clothes. And so we were constantly in trouble with each other. And when we started doing the closed circle, then all of a sudden, it was not an issue anymore, because we then, even what we did, and I suggest that to you guys too, with it than pocket money. You know, like she has her own cloth account and or envelope or jar, and she has her own pocket money jar, and so do I. I have my own cloth account or jar, and I have my own pocket money jar. And whenever I want to buy new electronics or whatever, then I have to save it up in my pocket money, and then I have to come up from there. And when I buy, then it's not her problems. She's not getting upset because she knows I'm not just taking it from food money or money that we would use or need somewhere else. She knows I'm taking it from my own money that I've gotten allocated in my jar, and therefore it it just took all the fighting out. It just took all the frustrations out, and it helped a lot. And of course, if you're not married, you don't have, not married, you don't have that problem with a spouse, but you might have that problem with yourself to some extent, because you might find yourself spending money that you're not supposed to spend because of your emotions that got involved, and then later you find out, shocks, somewhere I'm missing money. I can't pay my taxes, or I can't pay my accommodation, or whatever it might be, because you didn't prioritize. And so this can really help you and save you lots of troubles. And then, yeah, you got the freedom to spend where there is money. So that's also the great thing when maybe you have a tougher month, maybe there's not so much income coming in, but you do have money in clothes. Then you can go and buy your pair of shoes or your jacket or whatever you need without feeling guilty, because there's money allocated for that. And you know that at the end of the month or at the beginning of the month, whenever, you will still have money to pay for your rent, because that's a different category which is filled first, where whatever money comes in the beginning of the month. So you have the freedom to spend the money where there is money. And then it gives you real financial freedom. You might remember in the beginning of our first session, I mentioned that I want to lead you into financial freedom. But it's not the financial freedom that financial scams and these quick money schemes and so on promise you. Have financial freedom and you will never suffer again. This is not that kind of financial freedom. It's a financial freedom where you are the boss over Mammon, where Mammon is no longer in charge, but you are in charge, and where you will have money available for the top priorities when you need it. That's the thing that will give you the most freedom. When the payday comes for your rent, you actually have the money to pay it because you prioritized it. You haven't already spent it somewhere else. Or when the annual pay, the invoice comes for your taxes or for your insurance or whatever it might be, something that only comes annual, you will have it because you've saved for it, and it is in your jar. And that gives you real freedom, and it gives you a joy, because now you don't have to worry and to struggle what I'm going to do. Yeah, so I highly recommend that. It's brought a lot of freedom into our own lives, and it can certainly do the same for you as well. All right, before we move to handling debt, is there any still questions that you might have on that topic? Otherwise, we're going to close that topic now, the closed circle. Any questions or remarks from anyone? Your last chance. All right, I don't hear anyone, so I'm assuming you're content. Then let's move here, handling of debt. I find this a very important topic as well. And also the handling of debt has destroyed relationships in many, many ways, especially when it's between friends or family where money's been lent. And so there's a few principles that we want to look at this evening. And we want to look at from both sides, from the side of the lender, but also from the side of the borrower. So we want to see what are the implications and how can we handle it well. But before we look at the principles, let's first look what kinds of debt do we have commonly. I mean, there's two main categories that we often talk about, and the one is the consumer debt, right? So we've got consumer debt, which is the most common debt. Consumer debt is basically lending money to buy consumer goods such as electronics, vehicles, furniture, holidays, and the like. And then consumer goods do not keep their value. They usually lose value over time. Often they already lost half of their values by the time you take them out of the shop. And then people living on consumer loans are often living above their affordability. So consumer goods. You all know what that is. It's listed here, and there's many more to it. That's just a few examples. If you buy those on a loan, if you borrow money to buy electronics, vehicles, furniture, holidays, you're actually borrowing money for something that will not keep its value. So it's actually a bad deal. And I know it's very common, for example, for cars to be bought on loans, on installments, finance your car. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally legal and possible, and for many people that seems to be the only option. But what you're really doing is you're borrowing money, you pay a whole lot of interest on it. So at the end of the day, you pay, at the end of the 5 years or however long you do your financing, you pay maybe 1.5 to 2 times as much as what the car really costs. Plus, you've got a risk if it gets stolen, if it gets damaged in an accident, even though you have insurance, and normally you have to have comprehensive insurance, full cover. Your risk is still that you will not have the same value back, because those insurances, they will not replace the vehicle with a new vehicle. They will replace it with the replacement value that the vehicle still had at the time, at the age of the vehicle. So it's actually, at the end of the day, really a bad deal. It's much better if you can save the money. If you put a jar in your closed circle where you save up money and then buy it from what you've saved, and then keep on saving again for the next one, so that you're not behind, but you're actually ahead of yourself. And yeah, vehicle is one option, but then when people start buying cell phones or computers or furniture or holidays on loans, then it can become a real problem, because those goods are even faster in losing their value. And usually the interest rate is even higher on those goods. And in South Africa, some of those interest rates, they're even crazier than what I've ever seen before. I mean, some of the guys, they charge you 30% or whatever on loans, and that's just ridiculously high, and that should be illegal. Maybe it even is, but it's being done. So this is a huge trap, and I would almost go as far to say, please never ever touch consumer debt. Don't do it. It's not going to be healthy for you. It's a huge expense, and it's enslaving you, really. It's a slavery system, because whatever installment you have to do has to go into obligations. One of your top priorities, it comes before food. So basically, if you go into consumer debt, you end up paying for a new cell phone or a new computer before you can buy any food, you know. So it's a very dangerous thing, unless you have enough cash flow to do it. But then why don't you save the money and buy it when you have it? You know, with the microwave generation, I understand that. I also like things instantly. You know, the microwave generation, we put things in the microwave, wait 30 seconds, and it comes out warm. We can't wait for a whole hour anymore where it has to bake in the oven, right? We don't have that patience. We want it in 30 seconds. And that's the same thing with consumer goods. We want it now. And Mammon obviously makes sure that he manipulates our emotions to make us need things. We think we need it, and we need it now. And then he will push us into those loans. And so, yeah, I highly recommend stay away from consumer loans. Don't touch them. And if you have them now, get out of it as fast as you can. And I will show you also how that can work. And then lastly, consumer debt. Yeah, I said that, I covered that. Is very expensive. It's usually just too much interest that they charge. Then you have okay, I did say that also. Stay away from consumer debt. Then we have also asset-related debt. Asset-related debt are debt that is used to build or create assets. What are assets as opposed to consumer goods or liabilities? Assets are values that keep their value or increase their value over time. So they are part of an investment strategy. So the asset-related debt is part of an investment strategy and include property bonds, business financing, study loans. Asset-related loans are backed up with assets that generally keep their value or grow in value. I've said that earlier. people use asset-related loans very strategically to build wealth and leave a legacy. And asset-related loans are usually bigger amounts, but they charge less interest. So when, for example, you buy a house, or you want to buy a house, a property, you would go to the bank often and ask for a bond. And if you qualify with your financial assessment and so on, then they will grant you a bond, and then you will still have to pay installments. There's still an interest rate on it. You might still pay double the house at the end of the day, but your house might also have double the value by the time you've paid it back. Because normally, generally, it's not always like that, but generally, property keeps value or increases value over time. And the interest rate, even though in South Africa it might be around 10% right now with the bonds, it's still much less than what you would pay on consumer debt. And I see in Holland, we just have a little bit of a chuckle when we hear 10%, because there it might be more or less 2% or somewhere around there. I'm not sure about Holland, but I think in Switzerland it's 1.2, 1.3% on a bond right now. So yeah, so that's the differences in geography, but it's still, even with the 10%, it's much lower than what you would ever pay on a consumer debt. You could have business financing. If you invest into a business, if you start up a business, you would take up a loan. That's also an asset, because you're trusting that this business will take off and make you lots of money. Why is student loans or study loans, why are they asset-related debt? Any idea? Anyone wants to take a shot?
Well, I'm taking a student loan. Like in the end, you will have better prospects on a good job, which means that it can repay itself that way.
Exactly. Yeah, good answer. Because you're investing in yourself, so you're becoming the asset, and you will then more likely be able to earn more money or have a better career if you studied well. So a student loan or study loan would be asset related. Unless you're throwing your studies away later and say, no, I'm just going to sit at the beach and fish, and then it might not be an asset, but that's then your choice. But generally it would be asset related. All right. You guys understand the difference between consumer loans and asset related loans, right? Any questions? No? All right. Asset related debt is not necessarily bad. Are you saying something, Graham?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When it comes to, so when I started out, Diane, I bought everything cash, everything. So we saved and then we bought by cash. That was our whole strategy. However, then suddenly we learned the whole system, the whole financial system works totally against you if you do that.
Yes.
Because they want to know how many cards have you done, how have you looked after the cards, what is your track record? So they want to know. So we had to find out, okay, we had to open accounts and then pay the accounts off immediately. So make sure you open an account at the pharmacy, but pay it off. Don't have any money, you pay it off. So all the accounts, and that way, of course, I could get a much better score in my financial side in order to get what I needed to when I went to the bank for a house, etc. So if you pay everything in cash, it actually works against you in the financial system. You can't, when you go to get a bond for a house, they look at it and say, well, you don't have a score. Yeah. So
no, it's a very good and very valid point, Graham. I think the difference is how you manage it. So there's a way of using accounts without having to go into consumer debt. Because every account allows you to pay it back within 30 days without paying interest. So I also had to open an account or two in South Africa to get credit worthiness, or whatever they call it. Like I'm having a credit rating that is in good standing. So that means you have to have debt that you're paying back regularly to prove the system that you're worthy of taking out debt. And so if you want to buy a house and you want to get a bond, that's right what Graham says. You better have accounts with Vodacom, with Edgar's, with Woolies, or wherever, that they can see that you've been paying those on a regular basis without falling behind, because that will help you then to be trustworthy in their eyes. But for that, you don't have to be in debt. You can play as if you were in debt. So the way you do it, it's the same with a credit card. Even if you have a credit card, you don't need to have an account if you have a credit card, because that counts also as a debt. You take out the loan for that amount that you pay. So when I pay with my credit card, so I go and do my grocery, I put my credit card there, and then at the end, I come home and I have my receipt. I immediately book it off and separate that money in a separate blocked jar, in a sense. On my computer, I have a jar which is labeled as credit card, and then I'm taking it from my food money, from my food jar, and I deposit into the credit card jar. Now, on the system, I have debt, but at the end of the month, I will pay that debt, and I will not pay any interest because I paid within the month. So I'm showing on the system that I had debt for 30 days or 20 days or however long it was, and that I did pay it back in time. And that's the way you can create a credit rating without being in trouble and without paying the high interest rates that they would charge you if you fall behind, or if you do a longer, if you go into longer debt. But it still means I'm not buying things on money that I don't have. That's the big difference. So consumer debt, when you create consumer debt just to create a credit rating, and you buy stuff with money that you have, but you're just buying it on credit and pay it immediately a month later, that's not really going into debt. That's just playing the system. But if you buy consumer debt with money that you don't have, if you buy consumer goods with money that you don't have, and you create debt that you have to pay off over a few months because you don't have it in cash, then you're ending up in slavery, basically, because you're now enslaved to have to pay that off. Yeah. Does that help, Graham? Is that a helpful word?
Yeah, it was just a comment.
Yes, Bruno, I can.
Yes, Johannes?
From my side, I can just give an example of how debt can be an asset. As we came from ministry, from a structured ministry in the Dutch Reformed Church, and God took us in a new way, and later into YWAM, I didn't have any property on my name, and the decision was whether to rent the property or to start with a loan from using a part of my pension and then get a bank loan for the house. And eventually, after 3 or 4 years, I've been able to sell that house, make double of the money that I invested in it, repaying the rest of the bank loan. And in a sense, by using the bank and the loan to have a payment that was even less than the house would cost me if I rented the house. Now, after 3 or 4 years, I had an asset. I could double the income from it, rather than having paid monthly rent, and after 3 or 4 years, I have nothing to show for it. Yeah. So there are ways to use it in a positive way. Use it in a positive way, even rather than put it in a more volatile thing like a business or stuff. I think what you invest in is very important to really look what the solutions are or what the possibilities are. Yeah. And the security in that.
No, absolutely, and that's where if it's asset related, and I think that's a slide we stopped on here. It's when it's asset related that it's not necessarily bad, but it needs to be managed well. So it actually has potential, like you're saying, to create you income. That's why it's asset related. So it can create assets. So if you buy a house with a bond, then it's not really an asset yet unless you've paid it back, right? Because it's now still a debt, but it's an asset related debt. So once you pay the debt back, the loan back, then it's actually a full asset that you have. And then in many cases, like Johannes said rightfully, in many cases, the asset might be worth much more than what you actually invested in, especially if you have a little bit of a good nose to smell the right deal. Yeah, so asset-related debt is not necessarily bad. It can be bad if you invest it wrong, or if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't get advice in it. But in general, asset-related debt is something good to create assets, to create wealth, and you can use that strategically. All right. When you go into debt, make sure it is asset-related debt and not consumer debt, right? So that's just a bit of repetition from the previous 2 slides. And then calculate your affordability well. Can you pay the monthly installments? So before you know whether you can afford the monthly installments or not, you shouldn't sign a contract. So work that out first. You know, if you take a loan from a bank or from a financial institution, they legally bound to actually work that out with you. So they will ask you bank statements and budgets and so on. So they will work it out, or you will work it out as part of your application with them. But the moment you ask money from a private person, like a friend or family member, often that point gets forgotten. Then you ask, oh, I need to buy this and I don't have the money. Can you lend me money? And because they love you, they will do it. But you forget to actually calculate affordability. And that's a very key concept. You need to know whether you can afford to pay back or not. Because if you can't, you end up in big troubles. And especially when it's friends and family, it can destroy relationships. And you don't want to get there. Make sure you're not overpaying and the contractual details are fair. That's why I'm saying some guys, they're charging you 30%, and that's just out of the sane. It's really insane. That should be forbidden if it's not. And so never sign anything that is just out of the ordinary, and make sure your contractual details are fair. And if you don't know how to judge that, ask help. Get someone that knows what they're doing and ask them to advise you whether this contract is fair. Create a jar, an envelope in your closed circle, and prioritize it by placing it under obligations. So the moment you've signed your contract, then that monthly installment becomes an obligation, and it needs to be prioritized among the obligations. And the first thing you do when money comes in, you fill up your obligations, not your necessities, right? So it will be paid then accordingly. And if you then did not do the calculations right with your affordability, you will not suffer here with your jar in obligations. You will actually suffer in your food or in your clothes or somewhere else. So make sure you work that out well, otherwise you will feel it where it hurts the most. And then stay on top of your payments. Don't ever miss a payment, because that will be very bad for you, even in your track record. Because the financial institutions, they do track you, and you will be on a system that everyone can access. All the financial institutions, they can access that system, and they will know if you fell behind, and therefore they might not want to give you another loan. And that is especially hurtful when it comes to a point where you want to do it for other asset-related things. All right, so just to picture it again, when you sign a contract for a loan and you budget the installment, then this should happen. You should place a new jar among the obligations, and you call it, for example, installments. And you put, because we don't have it in this example now, but you put the number in there, how many rands or dollars or whatever it might be. You will have to budget every month. Okay. What about lending money to others? That's also a very sensitive topic, and many of us have experienced that people have come to us, hey, can you lend me some money? I need it for whatever, right? And usually, of course, it's not for asset-based money. Usually it's for consumer goods when people want to lend money or borrow money from you. When you lend money to others, remember that mammon needs to be managed well. What do I do with that, or mean with that? Well, I mean, money lending is always happening with a written agreement. Don't ever lend money just by a verbal agreement, even if it's your best friend or your family member, your mother, your father, your child, your brother, sister. Make it written. And if they feel offended by that, then rather don't give them the money then. Money needs to be handled with written contracts. There's no way around that. You will protect yourself, and you will protect the relationship, and you will protect them as well. Payment terms and interest rates are being established in such a written agreement. You cannot, okay, that's, I think, the next one, or is it? Yeah. pay me when you can doesn't work and often destroys relationships. Agree on clear and realistic payment terms. So you cannot have payment terms where you say, you know what, I'm lending you 1,000 Rand and you pay me back when you can. Guess what? They will never be able to do it because there will always be other priorities. And people have a mindset often that I can only pay back the 1,000 Rand when I actually have 1,000 Rand. But that's not the truth. You can pay back 1,000 Rand in installments. You can pay 1,000 Rand in 10 installments of 100 Rand each. So you don't have to have 1,000 Rand to pay back 1,000 Rand. You only have to have 100 Rand, but 10 times. And so rather make clear, if you don't want to charge interest, that's fine. If it's your friend and you don't want to charge them interest, that's up to you. Just remember that your money will not have the same value anymore in a year's time than it has today. It will probably have lost about 5, 6, 7% in value because of inflation. And now it might even be more with the corona. So when you do not charge interest, you're basically blessing the person with some of the value of the money. So again, it's not wrong to do interest-free lending, but when you do, you need to know what you're doing, that you're basically not getting the same value back at the end of the term. And write it down and then make sure the other person understands what your expectation is, how they should pay it back. Do you want monthly installments, weekly installments, annual installments, or what is it what you want? But make sure it's something realistic that you think the other person can do, and discuss it with the other person so that they can agree to it. And then you will save a lot of trouble. So pay me when you can, it's a no-go. Never use that when you lend money. Don't lend money if you cannot afford to lose it. Did you consider to bless your friend? That's one thing that we've started doing. We hardly ever, I can't say we never, but we hardly ever lend money to anyone anymore. We then rather pray and seek the Lord and seek our charts, our budget, our close circle. Can we bless the person? And then we would rather bless the person with that money rather than putting them into bondage and enslave them with us. So, because it's a risk. If you lend money, you will always have a risk that you might not get it back. So never lend money that you cannot afford to lose. And if you can afford to lose it, why not bless the person? So that's something to consider. I mean, that's my personal conviction. You don't have to believe that. That's just a tip that I would give you, an advice. Just also to be on the safe side, but also be on the generous side. And lastly, on that slide, don't lend money for consumer goods. That's also an advice I would give you. If people ask you for money, then ask them what you want to use it for. And if it's consumer goods, I would be very hesitant to lend money unless it's a very essential thing for them to go to work with or something like that. But then it's almost already an asset. If someone needs to buy a bicycle so that they can be a bicycle courier in town, then that's an essential thing for their business, right? And then, it's a consumer good, but it's really investing into a business idea. Then it's a different thing. But test it well and rather use this moment as a teachable moment of your friend or of your family member, and teach them about the biblical principles of finances and help them learning how to save, how to build up assets themselves, or not assets, how to save for consumer goods when it's about consumer goods. All right. Are you in debt and struggling? Some of you might be in debt right now and you might be struggling and you go like, how can I get out of it? Or you might know people that are, and you might be able to help them by the lesson that we're going through today. So if you're in debt and you're struggling, then I would suggest make a plan on how you can get out of debt as soon as possible. How do you plan that? There's different approaches. We're going to go there now. If you're a victim of a loan shark, find help. What is a loan shark? That's those guys who charge you 30% or more for your loan. I call them loan sharks. And if you're a victim of one of those, find help. There is debt counselors. There's other people that can help you. And then there's institutions that will even buy you out and you have debt with them for much better rates. so that you can get out. Because with loan sharks, usually it's a vicious circle that you can hardly get out anymore, because the interest rates are so high that you can't pay back even the debt. You keep on paying interest and accumulating more debt. Maybe draw in help from a debt counselor. They can help you to restructure your debt. So debt counselors, they don't work for free, but they work their fees into the whole repayments, and they can help you to restructure your debts. So if you have debt with different companies, they can negotiate on your behalf. And sometimes they can negotiate it down to very minimal payments that you would never have thought were possible. But if a debt counselor is involved, the companies will most likely agree to it, because they will say, I'd rather have 100 Rand a month than nothing, when you maybe owe them 2,000 Rand a month, you know. So they will negotiate on your behalf, and they're usually quite successful because they know how to do it. But then they will work with you a plan that you can afford, and then you will have to stick to that. And that will help you to get out of debt. If you owe money to friends or family, talk with them openly about your situation and offer them a payment plan. So that's often a situation that I find people in. They've gone into debt with a friend or with a family member, and they struggle to pay because the family member maybe told them, oh, you know what, pay me when you can. But now you've prioritized it at the end of your list, and it's never been a priority to pay that debt back. But maybe it's been a year now or 2 years, and you still haven't really come up with a plan on how to pay it. And you start feeling that there's something between you, because now you feel guilty. You know that you should pay, and so you have certain amount of guilt. Your friend or your family member looks at you with some maybe anger or frustration or whatever, but they're not content because they don't see you paying back the debt that you made, but they see you walk around with new shoes, or they see you walk around with a new phone, or with airtime in your phone, or whatever. So they start judging you because now you're buying all these things, yet you're not paying them back. So it creates this huge problem between you in a relationship way. So when you recognize that and you haven't had an agreement with them, go and make one, throw one up. Now is the time. Go and talk to them. Say, look, I've realized I haven't honored my repayments. Yeah, you told me I should pay when I can. I never could. But now I would like to rather come up with a plan of installments. Can I pay you every week 10 Rand, or every month 100 Rand, or whatever you can afford? Work it out, make them an affordable offer, and then agree with them if they are happy. If they're not happy, you will have to come up with a different plan, because they are the ones that actually have the right to demand, because it's their money. And then, like we did in the previous example, when you sign a contract for an installment, then you create a loan jar or an envelope in your obligations, and then you work out with God and in negotiation with your lender how that you will pay back every month. So it's important that you draw in your lender in the negotiations. You can't just go and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to pay you now 100 Rand a month. No, ask the lender. I think I can afford 100 Rand a month. Will you be happy if I do that? And then let them be part of the negotiation. Maybe they will challenge you and say, yeah, is it not possible that you can come up with a double? You know, that you pay me 200 Rand. Can you not cut somewhere else? Because I really want my money back faster now. Let them be part of the negotiations, and then see what you can do and what you cannot do. And then draw God in as well and ask him, what can I trust you for, Lord? What is realistic? And then put it in as a priority in your obligations, and then pay it back every month without missing one. When you give to others, you are actually giving your lender's money away. So if you haven't gotten a lending agreement, you know, a repayment agreement where you pay back every month so much that you've agreed, if there's no agreement and you bless people, you're not blessing out of your own money, you're blessing out of someone else's pocket. And so the blessing that comes with giving doesn't come back to you, it comes back to your lender, which is great. You can bless him in that way. But it's much better to have an agreement on how to repay. And then what happens is, once you've gotten that agreement, then the only thing you owe for that month is what you've agreed the installment should be. Well, we're going to get back to that. The best way to get out of debt is by committing to monthly installments. I've covered on that. When you plan them, try to make them as affordable as possible. Remember that the lender needs to agree on these terms. And when the lender agrees, then all you owe for that month is that one installment until the next one starts. So you might, let's say you might owe 10,000 Rand and you've never managed to pay it back because you somehow thought, I'm going to pay back when I have the 10,000 Rand again. But now you realize, okay, I'm gonna have to change this. I have to start paying back 1,000 Rand a month. I can do it within my budget. So you go to the lender and you negotiate and say, hey, I'm sorry, I haven't paid you, but I want to start paying 1,000 Rand a month. Would that be acceptable to you? If the lender says, yes, that's great. Thank you so much for coming back to me. I was already wondering how I'm going to get that money back. But 1,000 Rand a month, that will work for me. Then in 10 months, I've got my money back. Then best is to draw it on a contract written. You both sign it, and that's your agreement. And then what happens is, for that month, you don't owe him 10,000 Rand. You owe him 1,000 Rand. And then for the next month, you owe him another 1,000 Rand. And for the next one, another 1,000 Rand. So with such an agreement, you don't owe the full amounts for that month. You still owe it. You know what I mean? But you don't. It's not a pressure for that month. The pressure is gone. You don't have the expectation even from your lender's side to pay him more than 1,000 Rand. So that means when you pay that 1,000 Rand to him, then with all the freedom, you can prioritize the rest of your money that comes in for the other obligations that you have. And if you then, and needs and wants. And if you then happen to have an overflow, then you go back to God and say, God, I have an overflow. I still have debt, but I also have an overflow that I could use now for your kingdom. What should I be doing? I can't say what God will tell you. I tend to believe he will want you to pay back the debt faster, but it might also not be. And that's between you and God. But because we've gotten that agreement and because you've paid that 1,000 Rand, you now do have the freedom to wait for the next month to pay the next 1,000 Rand. So that gives you much more flexibility again and freedom, and you won't feel guilty anymore. Make sure you are faithfully paying monthly. Don't miss a payment. And if you do, don't do it without communication. And rather go and apologize and ask if you can be released from that month payment, rather than saying, sorry, I can't pay, I will pay next month. Rather go and ask, would you be able to release me this month? Or would it be okay if I only pay half the installment this month? Now, if you bless someone, it will be your money you bless them with, because now you've got an agreement and there's no sour feelings to it anymore. All right, so I've covered quite a bit now. Let me just stop here and open up for questions, comments. Anyone? Graham.
Yeah, I would agree with the debt situation, but help me how you see this. We bought our first base with no money. And then had to take a loan, of course. So we bought the building with no money. Then we had to take a loan, took the loan, and then we had to sign up all of our assets, which obviously, yeah, that's how it works. And so every single month we were just praying for the money, and it came in, etc. And then when we bought our second property, we also bought it with no money and mortgaged our house, and it got down to the bank wanted to take our house back, take our house. And so on the Thursday night, I told Diane, on Monday, we're losing our house. Friday morning, got a telephone call, and the guy said, listen, we would like to give you, then it was 7 million against another building and so on. So it got us out of a situation. So what you're teaching, and I agree, but when it comes to like ministries, sometimes you feel that God is telling you to step out in faith and go for this, right?
Yeah.
so I would be cautious to teach new guys who want to go, by their base to go the same way, unless they're absolutely sure what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, Graham. And I think that's what I'm also teaching. Part of this teaching is it's a relationship with the Lord, right? So there's some principles, and I would advise anyone out of human logic, don't do what Graham has done, because you're ruining your own finances, your private finance. You're mixing, you're putting your private finances at risk for ministry. Don't do it. I would advise everyone to do that, unless God has spoken to you. And spoken clearly to you, and maybe you've even been accountable to friends or leaders around you, and then it's a whole different story, right? Then it becomes a God thing, and then those stories also happen, which Graham just shared, that God will redeem situations because He has spoken and He's faithful. So what I'm doing here is I'm teaching principles, and we need to understand how mammon works and how debt works and how it doesn't work. And if we don't understand those principles, we cannot survive in the mammon world. We have to understand how to manage mammon. But at the same time, I'm teaching relationship and hearing God's voice, and that is above everything else. But you can much more likely hear His voice in a better context if you understand those principles. So yes, I agree 100%. And I know there's hundreds of stories, especially in YWAM, of exactly those examples that Graham just shared. And it's because men and women of God have heard His voice, and they stepped out in faith and in obedience, and they've done the impossible by that. But even there, Graham, you've done it with contracts, you've done it with signing and so on, right? So it's you understood the principles behind it, and you understood the risk you would put yourself in. Anyone else? Everything clear?
Could I say one more thing? I don't want to take time.
No, it's good. Go for it.
I think just to also add on to that, just so guys listening, I have a board, and I submit myself to a board. And about a year ago, they came to me, and the board chairman at a meeting said, we have been speaking amongst ourselves, and we have something to say to you and Diane. And I immediately thought in my head, what on earth have I done messed up? And then he went on to say, we want you to know that we are your good friends, and if you don't do what we ask you to do, we're not going to say we won't be your friends, but you'll put a lot of pressure on our friendship. So I thought, what on earth are you going to say? And then they said, we want to say we do not want you to mortgage your house again for ministry at your age. So immediately now I submit myself to that because I'm under that authority. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's wisdom. Thank you for sharing that, Graham. That's very important. We often forget that we all should have accountability partners, whether it's a board, whether it's your leaders, whether it's your parents, your friends. And so when you do that, and I've said that before as well, even in your personal finances, if you draw up your finances, your close circle, don't do it isolated on your own. Draw people in, draw elders in, or friends that can keep you accountable and can pray with you. Then you're really much safer in that as well. All right. We've covered questions. Oh, that's the end of today's session. Of our debt session, I'm going to still introduce next week. You guys surprised me with not having so much question with the charts and the closed circle. I'm really still very impressed. You guys all got it, and I hope you can also really apply it in your own life. I do make myself available if anyone has personal questions. How can I do that in my life? How can I apply it? If you want to get some more coaching in that, contact me, and I'll see how we can manage that through Zoom or emails and so on. But I'd love to help you and to get you successfully set up for a financial freedom future in the sense of what I've said earlier. So this was the last official session. The next session next week is a bonus session. Why is it bonus? Because I'm changing hats. So up until now, I've brought you teaching as a WOWAMer, as a WOWAM leader in the mission, and the next session I'm going to do as a wealth coach of the GIG CFI. The GIG CFI, I've said that in the very beginning, stands for Generational Inheritance Group. CFI stands for Cooperative Financial, it's CFI institution, yes, Cooperative Financial Institution. It's a cooperative bank or cooperative financial institution in South Africa. Think about 6 or 7 years old, so still fairly young. I've been part of their board for 3 years, for 1 term, until I stepped down, but I'm still one of their wealth coaches. And we do basically training in the 3-generational approach of investment. So you don't think for yourself when you invest, you don't think for your children when you invest, you think for the 3rd generation, your children's children. That's the biblical model from a proverb that we're going to look at next week as well. And so when I'm doing the bonus session, I'm coming in as the wealth coach with that hat. And so it's free for you to choose whether you want to join or not. Like you could choose with every other session anyway, but it's just going to be a slightly different approach. So that will be next Monday, 8 o'clock till 9:30, same time. And yeah, it would be great to see some of you there again. But other than that, I'm done with the teaching, with the basics, the foundation. And if there is still some questions or remarks, then please, by all means, you still have a few minutes. And then we will end the session. So if anyone still wants to ask anything, feel free to do so.
I've got another question.
Yeah.
If I may. If no one else, I've already asked 2 questions. So if there's someone else, let them go first.
No, shoot, and they can still ask afterwards.
Okay. When it comes to tithing, just comment on, so I don't have a problem with 10% as a principle. But I would feel that I go more with like Lauren's teaching, that it would be an Old Testament principle tithing. New Testament principle is everything belongs to God.
Mm.
So I asked God at the beginning of the month, well, how much should I be giving to you? If it's 20%, I give him 20%, 30%, 30%, 40, 50, whatever. And 1 month he might say, give everything away and trust me for it.
Mm.
So because I find that the 10% can actually also become a little legalistic.
Yeah.
Now, it's a good principle because a lot of people end up saying, well, I don't believe it. And then they end up, as most people in the church, are only giving 2-3%.
Mm.
We know that. So I know that's good. But as we grow in our faith and our walk, surely we should be moving more towards that everything belongs to God.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So nothing more to say. I think that the tithe, even though it is an Old Testament principle, and I agree with that, is still a good guideline to start with. If you've not been generous at all, then that should be the minimum, and that's where God can test your heart for the first time, or where you can prove God that your heart is within. But I agree with you 100%. It's everything that you have belongs to the Lord. We're just stewards, and if He asks us to give everything back to Him, then let's trust Him and let's do it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bruno, thank you very much for this teaching. I really enjoyed it. I just perhaps want to share a little story, as it once was over the radio in South Africa, and it's a principle they call a set-off. So the story is about the guy who came to a hotel and he wanted to book a bed for the night, but he was not sure whether his meeting is going to be that long. So he asked, can he take the money back if his meeting is short? And so what happened is he gave, say, for instance, the 400 Rand to the hotel management. The hotel owner owned the butcher 400, so he took the money there, and his debt was settled with the butcher. And so the butcher, he owed the farmer, and the farmer, he took the 400 to the farmer. And then the farmer's son was studying from the hotel. He was renting a flat there, and he was owing the hotel manager. So he took the 400 to the hotel manager back. And then the guy came back and he said, but I'm not going to sleep over tonight. Can I get my 400 back? So the hotel manager gave him the 400 back, and he went, and everybody's debt was settled. And in a sense, that little story, and it's difficult to explain how it became that without really anything being owed to anybody, a lot of changes happened. It can also be that sometimes when you can structure the borrowing of money, then we can really make a difference in society. And I've recently had a situation where I could borrow somebody money, somebody else gave him eventually a sponsor, and I got my money back, he got his car, and it's a wonderful story of how the Lord's been faithful.
Yeah.
So I really would, but there was a written agreement and everything. So there are really ways in which we can creatively borrow, and still make a difference in the world. So let us keep that in mind also in the way we work with our finances.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful. I agree. You know, if we understand those principles, then we can also start using them to redeem ourselves first and our debt, but then also help others to get redeemed. And I think that's where the power comes in of that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question more just with lending, and if I lend to someone and charging interest on that, what are your thoughts on the Old Testament principles of where it says don't charge interest to a fellow Israelite, a poor fellow Israelite?
Yeah, look, I'm not very, honestly, not very clued up about all the details of it from the biblical perspective now on that particular issue with interest. I'm not a big fan of interest personally. The interest is something that is put on originally. I mean, it's not handled like that anymore much, but originally it is something that was supposed to cover for inflation, to basically keep the value over time of money because of the inflation. So that's the idea of interest originally, but it's been used, obviously abused now by putting much more interest on it and making money on it and so on. So if you were to charge interest, then it should be a fair interest that is really just to catch that inflation. But personally, I'm not a big fan of charging interest. I would rather give interest-free loans, but knowing that my value will lose. I just need to be aware of that when I do that. Because if I lend 10,000 Rand today and I only get it back in 2 years, I cannot buy it. It doesn't have the same buying power anymore in 2 years. And I have to be aware of that, you know. But that's my personal view. But I think, I can't go too much into those scriptures because I'm not enough familiar with it. But I think it might have had a protective approach on those abuses, that you don't want to overcharge people and drive them into more poverty than they already are. So the Bible always had an aspect of, we don't want to drive people into poverty, we want to help them out of poverty rather. Okay, thanks. I don't know if that helps.
Well, on the same note, sorry, can I go?
Please, sorry, I was drinking, but I'm listening.
On the same note, I remember exactly where the scripture is, but maybe Johannes remembers. But in the Bible, it says that every time that you can make debt is when you buy a million. And then if the person who bought that stone, I'm not sure if it's in the same area, if they can't pay you within 7 years, you've got to release them from that debt. And maybe what we found in practical experience, a milling stone is something that's going to produce wealth or income.
It's an asset, yeah.
So if you're buying, it's an asset. So if you're buying assets like that, and they're too big to actually buy in one go. Then you have to look at how do you finance it. But there's also a lot that can be said for financing something. You've got to, it's not really always necessary to get a bank loan or something like that. But maybe we could just talk a bit about it if you're interested to do that. I can just mention we have a lot of power outages where we are, and I've got to buy some solar equipment, but it's quite pricey, and I've got to look at how we're going to be able to finance it. And I've got to make very sure of the commitments that I make, that I can meet those commitments in the time that I have. So maybe we can just talk a bit about that.
Yeah, look, originally, I think it's a very good point, Karel. Originally, the idea probably was that in a family, what do you call it, family unit or family compound or whatever you want to call it. I don't have the word now, the English word. But among family, you help each other like that. And if that's why we talk about 3 generations. So next week, we will talk a lot about what you just putting on the plate here. Because if you have a 3-generational approach and you start saving money now, not for you to have a pension in the first place, but for your grandchildren to have a future, which will make sure you will also have a pension, but that's not the focus. The focus will be your grandchildren having a future. And then all of a sudden you're becoming part of empowering them with getting a kickstart into their life. And that's what you sort of touching on without saying it. If we can together as a unit, as a it can be family, it can also be friends, it can be like a cooperative in our case with the Gig CFI. If as a cooperative we can step together and say, okay, we can do a group loan together and we finance something bigger together, then all of us have a share in that and all of us contribute. In Africa, we call it stokvel, right? Some of you know what is a stokvel, where say 10 people together, they say we're saving for something, and everyone puts in 100 Rand every month or every week, and then the first one gets the pay of everyone, and then the second one gets it next week, and so on. And that's a way of helping people to finance things in a way where everyone contributes and everyone gets the benefit of it. And it's different forms. So that the stokvel is a very African way of doing it, and that's great. The cooperative is a more European way of doing it, but it's the same principle behind it of leveraging off each other and for each other, not for someone else's gain, like shareholders' gain and so on, where someone else takes the profit of what you're putting in. And I think that we have a lot to learn, and we're going to touch next week on that, on how do we create assets and wealth together, and how you're not on your own in those times. And like you said, how can we even think innovative when there's no electricity available or not enough? How can I make sure that I have it and my friends around me or my neighbors and so on? And you could go on with water sources and many, many other things. So there's lots of options, lots of possibilities, but it needs a paradigm shift in a lot of us, because we are trained and grew up as the microwave generation, as I said earlier. We're not used to think generations ahead. But that would be the biblical model. Yeah. I think we've lost Karel on the way.
No, you haven't. I've just lost mine. I just had to switch it off. I actually lost my connectivity a little while ago, and I think it's this power outage that we have that the tower actually went out. So, but anyway, I'm back for this little while. Just on that point further, something I found is that when you loan money, you really have to think very carefully about it. But you shouldn't loan money, and maybe we can talk about this also, in the expectation that you're always going to get it back. And maybe I'm not putting it very well, but I have found that where there are people who are really in need, there's a difference between a gift for them to help them and a loan. And I think quite often when people are always dependent on gifts, they never actually learn to take responsibility, like Graham said, for funding something. And that's not always a good thing to do, because they always, they start relying on these gifts. And maybe you could talk a bit about that as well. Just to say, I take the personal position that if I loan somebody money, I've got to understand I should never get to a point where I want to wrench the money out of them. It's something. No,
I agree with you. That's why I'm saying never lend money unless you're able and willing to lose it, right? And if you are willing and able to lose it, why don't you give it? I said that. But I also hear you and I agree with you. Sometimes just giving can also be counterproductive. It cannot be the best for the person. So I've done loans. I'm not doing no loans at all, but I'm very hesitant in doing them because whenever I do a loan, it means for me that I'm immediately entering into a discipleship relationship with the person I'm lending the money to. And they will need to be willing to do that. So I'm not giving money so it starts already with us drawing the agreement, right? So that I say, okay, what do you need the money for? And then checking with them, is it a legitimate way? Like I've had a friend, he wanted to, I don't want to give too much details. I don't want people to guess. But he wanted to create a bit of a business, and whenever I hear business or assets or stuff like that, then I'm open, if I can help, to help. But it needs to then be in a very discipling way, in a sense where we have the same understanding what it means, what are the expectations, but then also it is a possibility or opportunity to teach the person not to take loans anymore in the future if not absolutely necessary. So that particular friend, he ended up doing a micro business startup program, and then he was taught to run his own business more successfully, more fruitful. And then after that, he actually started saving money for a whole year. And he would come at the end of the year and say, hey, Bruno, did you realize I didn't ask you this year to lend money for my business? Because now I've saved it up myself and I can finance it myself. So that was a success story which required me investing a lot of time, but also required a very teachable borrower on the other side that was willing to learn and to be challenged in his thinking. So I think, that's my approach. I believe in loans when they are done in an accountable and discipling relationship where you can lead someone out of a mentality of having to borrow money, but can lead someone into a mentality of saving money and being able to pay cash in the future.
I quite like what you're saying, but in our context, and maybe you're going to talk about it in gig, but maybe we must look at this whole thing about developing a seed capital for people, where this discipleship goes with it. And if you look at the business models, just very briefly, I have a cousin that's a publisher, and he got his first buyout loan to buy a very big publishing company in South Africa. But they had very strict rules that he had to adhere to be able to do that MBO. And I think this is a big opportunity in YWAM, is that we really start educating people in practical ways how to run. I mean, you're onto that micro business, but I think it's almost too easy to lend money and not take the responsibility for actually paying it back. And I think that's something, what you said now, there must be this discipleship, there must be this point where the person is released from having to borrow money.
Yeah,
But maybe that's more in the gig environment, but
exactly.
something
So,
we've got to think.
yeah, so that will come next week. I mean, gig is also lending money, but you cannot lend money. Well, there's also products where you can lend without having saved first, but generally you first have to prove that you can save before you can lend or borrow. Sorry, before you can borrow money. And but yeah, we can talk about that next week a bit more. We'll talk a lot about the 3-generational approach. We'll talk about lending for asset creation and so on. All right. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, I'll be interested in hearing your opinion on like giving tithing or giving to the church. In the case that you basically live off loans, in my case, a student loan.
Yeah.
Would you in that case still say, well, give to the church while you're living on money of government in this case? Or that case not, because it's not your money?
Yeah, so it depends how the loan is structured. So are you saying basically you're getting money from the government, which is your income basically, but you have to pay everything back?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, then I would probably not have a strict law on tithing there because it's dedicated money. But coming back to what Graham said earlier, at the end of the day, if you have an understanding that everything you get belongs to the Lord, then you can still be generous within that. So I would rather appeal to a generous lifestyle in that situation, and than necessarily tithing, because from a legal point of view, it's dedicated. Dedicated. Is that the right word? Dedicated money. It's not actually really an income. It will become an income when you earn it, and that's when you tithe, and then you pay back from the rest. Yeah, it's a technical question, but it shouldn't. So it shouldn't exclude you from living a generous lifestyle by maybe cutting on some of the things that you might, buy for your enjoyment. So rather have a generous lifestyle. That would be my approach. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, is there nobody else? Then thank you so much. I really enjoyed this series. It was a first for me to do 4 nights in a row or 4 weeks in a row. I've done some Zoom teachings before, but not with so many attendees. And it's really been a pleasant experience for me. I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the interaction with you guys. And hopefully I will see some of you next week. And if not, be blessed. And I hope this will really bring a lot of great fruit in your life, and that you will see the financial freedom out of a biblical perspective, a godly perspective, God's freedom in your finances. And once again, if you want to discuss anything further with me in the weeks to come, feel free. You got my email address. You can connect with me, and then I'm gladly available to assist you and hopefully help you to fruitfulness.